Howdy, everybody. Let's check a few things here. Yep, cam's working. So, good afternoon. Doing a quick video. Probably going to cover this one in two parts, I decided, because Nate did two videos about this particular issue. It's not really much of an issue, but he kind of made a big deal out of it. So, let's see here. Let me add this on. Flip us around here. So, the issue in this one is Nate kind of fixated on this one, did a couple videos on it. This is about the Chicago Teachers Union president. It got found out that she enrolled one of her kids, her oldest, in a private school for this year down in Chicago, private Catholic school. And she is the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. So the title on this is Woke Teachers Union Boss Calls Private Schools Racist but Sends Her Kid, or kids, does it say kids? Her kid there. Okay. Tad awkward. Anyway, so that's the title. So, okay. So she just called all private schools racist. And then she did that and then enrolled one of her kids in a private school. Sounds bad. So I'm going to play this video and we'll see what happens. Pausing and interrupting like I do, annoying the hell out of everybody that's watching it. You know how I am. Let's make sure the audio is actually going to work. If I changed my mic input. All right, here we go.
On behalf of Chicago public school teachers. So why is Chicago Teachers Union President Stacy Davis Gates sending her own child to a private high school?
Our political reporter Marianne Ahern spent this week trying to get an answer. Marianne joins us now. And Marianne, finally we understand you have a response.
Allison and Stefan, yes. After 3 days of asking questions, we have confirmed this year CTU President Davis Gates enrolled her teenager to a Catholic high school. She does not want to talk to us about it, but she's been very vocal in the past about her opposition to private schools.
And not only that,
So I want you to put a pin in that, because the whole point of me taking a look at this is to look at media narrative, media criticism, and just critical thinking in general, and consider what that local news thing just set up. Okay, so she just enrolled her kid in a private school. Let's consider what Stacy Davis Gates, current Chicago Teachers Union president, has said about private schools.
Head of the teachers union called school choice and sending your kids to private school racist.
Wrong. She didn't.
She's blaming it all on racism. Let me explain. All right, so let's talk about school choice. Now, public schools in black neighborhoods.
No, let's not. Let's focus on something slightly different before he kind of like guides the narrative over into something. I mean, it's tangentially connected to this, but it's not. Well, I can't really get a direct statement from her because they end up piling a couple together. Let me play this thing through because I think they're going to actually show some quotes that Stacy Davis Gates has said about school choice, not private schools, but school choice initiatives. And by school choice, it's very important to make that distinction. When we're talking about school choice from the teachers union perspective, we're talking about school choice policy initiatives, the direction of public money towards students to attend private institutions. We're not talking about the ability for people to choose to send their kids to different schools, although that's connected, but that's not what's being. A lot of these different terms are being conflated very irresponsibly throughout this video, not only by the news sources that Nate's chosen, but by Nate himself, and you'll see here.
Are failing schools. It's just true. That's just what happened. In Chicago, the worst schools are in black neighborhoods run by the teachers union. Now, why is that? It's because they don't give a damn about those kids.
This is okay. So despite your feelings about teachers unions in general, and Nate seems to have a real problem with the Chicago Teachers Union. That statement that he made there, that the Chicago schools, the public schools that are failing, are all run by the Chicago Teachers Union. That is demonstrably false, and categorically incorrect. The Chicago School Board runs the public schools in Chicago. The teachers union is the bargaining entity, the collective bargaining entity that the teachers are usually members of, and that group, that organization bargains for them and negotiates their contracts with them. That can have an effect on policy and certain policy decisions that go forward, work conditions, all those kinds of things. But the union does not run, quote unquote, run the schools. That's a BS statement. So if Nate's trying to say this in sort of like well, they practically run the schools, like they're an organized crime outfit that practically runs the town. Okay, if he's trying to use it that way, fine. But he's not indicating that this is an exaggeration or that he's being, trying to be, figurative about this. He's saying they run it. They don't. Teachers unions don't run schools. School boards run public schools.
And, as long as they're getting paid, they just don't care. So
prove that. This is a common right-wing talking point about unions in general that can be directed at anybody. You could direct this at law enforcement unions, automotive unions, trade unions, plumbers unions, things like that. As long as they get paid, they don't care, and then they'll just continue to do crap jobs. They're mobbed up, and they're not responsive to the public or to the needs of consumers or whatever. Okay, there's nothing to indicate here from what Stacy Davis Gates has said that the teachers union is just completely immune to the concerns and just deaf to anything that's going on in the community, so long as they get paid. This is just Nate repeating a conservative narrative about unions that he doesn't like, teachers unions, because Nate is a former law enforcement officer and was a former law enforcement, I believe, in New York City or one of the boroughs around that. I'm about 99% certain that he was a member of a police union. And I don't know that I've ever heard Nate speak critically about police unions, but he's more than willing to come on here in his video and say that the Chicago Teachers Union, one, runs the schools of the city of Chicago. They don't. Two, runs them badly. Three, seems to be making sure that all the ones that are black majority are failing schools. And they do that because they don't care about the students. They care about themselves and their paychecks. Okay, so I think we're all on the same page here.
When parents and people in that neighborhood want to send their children to better schools, private schools, charter schools, the teachers union says no. And the teachers union president, as a fear tactic, calls those schools racist, because she wants to let the poor and minority students continue to be underserved. And she doesn't want them to escape and get a better education. And to try to prove that she's just like everyone else, she says, hey, I send my kids to public schools just like everybody else, right? I'm sending my kids to the same failing schools. She walks the walk and talks the talk. But now we know that she doesn't walk the walk. She actually pays to have her kid go to a private school.
Well, she's about to. The kid just got enrolled this year. I don't think he started yet. Or maybe he did in August. He just got started. She has two other children. Some of the articles that are out there, if you look into this, they just like, well, she sends her kids to private school. Or she sends her kid to private. She has three kids. One of them is getting sent to private school now because he's entered 9th grade. So he's a high schooler. And she has stated that high schools in the area are not great in terms of the programs they can offer. Once you start getting in 9th grade and you're worried about your kid having some kind of chance being able to get into a decent college based on their high school, their transcript and their extracurricular activities, their athletic opportunities, any of that kind of stuff. So that's why she chose that. She's probably going to run into this unless things really radically change quickly in Chicago with her two daughters who are younger and both still enrolled in public schools. Nicholas says, spoiler, not really hypocritical. Nate really has an issue with understanding people, that people can prioritize values differently. Yeah, and that seems to be it. Not only that, but this seems to be, he's really reaching out. For a guy that usually will talk about bringing the receipts and being critical of the media narrative, he has swallowed this conservative media narrative hook, line, and sinker. And that's why I'm here.
Now, the community is saying she is a monster hypocrite. Why should you let other people's children go to failing schools while your child goes to a well-to-do private school? Here is this president of the teachers union calling private schools and charter schools essentially racist. Okay. Check it out.
Last year, in a Chicago Magazine article, Gates said, quote, I can't advocate on behalf of public education without it taking root in my own household. Publicly, Gates has voiced strong opposition to school choice in the Illinois Invest in Kids program that allows for tax credits that benefit private schools. On social media, Gates said, quote, "School choice was actually the choice of racists. It was created to avoid integrating schools with black children." She also posted a link to this article titled, "The Racist Origins of Private School Vouchers." Gates' family neighborhood school is Harlan High School. It ranks 437 out of 664 Illinois high schools.
Just so you guys understand the difference between the education a student gets from the private or charter school and what he gets from a public school, here is a clip from Morning Joe.
Okay, so I guess Nate's just going to ignore that. Nate said that that was his evidence that Stacy Davis Gates said that private schools were racist. She didn't say private schools were racist. She said private school choice initiatives and school choice policy and programs are racist or rooted in some kind of racist ideology or racist motivation. She didn't say all private schools were racist. That's an important distinction if you're going to try to do that. But this is something that I find frequently, and I'm going to end up repeating this a lot when I cover these kinds of things. Nate, this is a common tactic that Nate likes to use, is that if someone has come out and given a structural criticism of something, an institution, a policy, whatever, and then in that criticism labeled something about that phenomenon or policy or concept as being intrinsically or tangentially racist, let's say, that's a structural criticism. What Nate will then try to do is then connect that and conflate that with a personal criticism or even a personal attack and try to make it about the individual as much as possible. And in this case, what he's trying to do is seemingly he's trying to connect this idea that, well, she has these strong feelings about school choice, therefore she has these strong feelings about private schools in general, and so therefore she's a hypocrite if she sends her kid to a private one. That's the same as her being a racist, even if that followed, which I don't think it does. The problem here is that what he's labeling her as, like she's saying that private schools are racist, is completely missing the mark. It's completely missing the mark. She has not come out and ever said that private schools are racist, or that a private school in particular is racist, or just private schools as a concept are racist. She's talking about school choice initiatives, policies, and programs. And that, from a teachers union type representative and the president, is going to be based on the idea that they generally object to public money being directed away from already underfunded public schools towards private schools in order to kind of shift the burden of a problem. And it's a very complicated issue, and it varies from city to city and from state to state. And so what's going to happen now is that Nate, having played what he believes is proof of Stacy Davis Gates saying private school is racist, is to go into this Morning Joe thing where they're talking to, I believe, a state rep from New York.
On MSNBC, where they were arguing with a teachers union advocate about the numbers, about the success between a charter school in New York and the public schools. And I want you to hear these numbers for what they are, because you're going to be shocked.
You say they aren't working. Let me show you. This is a Stanford study. I know you're aware of this study. Stanford study on New York City schools. You say it's not working. I want to get your response to this and tell me how they're not working. First, let's put up the chart. This is a Stanford study. Challenges facing charter schools in Harlem and New York. 91% of charter students participating in these schools are economically disadvantaged. They participate in school lunch programs. The charter school students are more likely to be poor, more likely to be black, and charter school students are predominantly from New York City's poorest and most at-risk neighborhoods. And then Stanford says, despite these challenges, this is how charter schools in New York have erased the gap between rich and poor. Students who attend charter schools close 86% of the Scarsdale-Harlem achievement gap, saying that Harlem students do 86% as well as Scarsdale students, which is remarkable, according to the Stanford study. Students who spend grades 10 through 12 in charter schools are 21% more likely to graduate and get a Regents diploma. And some charter Harlem schools averaged higher scores school-wide than schools in the wealthiest, and I will add, the whitest communities in all of New York State.
Okay, nothing about this, nothing about anything that's going on with this clip has anything to do with Stacy Davis Gates. She hasn't even leveled a complaint saying that charter schools are crap. Nothing about this is centered on, like, does Stacy Davis Gates believe all charter schools or all private schools are bad? They perform badly. Uh, we haven't heard that take. Nate's just decided to run with it. Well, here she is saying that these schools are racist, and now I'm going to show this clip here with Joe Scarborough defending charter schools, um, and saying they're performing well and they're doing great in these otherwise underserved communities. Well, for certain charter schools in certain cities and certain states, that might be the case. Those numbers may have turned around really well for them. That's not the issue that Davis Gates had with school choice. It's the issue is about how you're funding that. The idea of shifting public funding away from public institutions that are losing that money and shifting it over to schools that are private, that don't have school boards, that don't have school unions, right? Now, it might be great for somebody like Nate to say, "Oh, well, these private schools, they don't have school unions, they don't have teachers unions, so we don't have to worry about these teachers being mobbed up with some union that's going to, like, throw our kids under the bus in exchange for their lavish paychecks or whatever." Which, okay. Um, but they also don't have school boards that are elected by the citizens. So you can scratch that whole thing where you have the school board meeting and the community can show up and vent about what the school's doing, about how they're leading their kids to Satan or they're indoctrinating them into the LGBTQ mafia, and any of those great clips that we saw over the last few years, especially coming right out to the tail end of the pandemic. The reason that those exist is because those school boards are democratically elected and they have accountability to the population around them. The private ones don't, not so much. Now, there can be differences in certain states where part of the agreement is if you're going to be a charter school and you're going to get set up with this, you do have to have some kind of board set up, I think, maybe. But it just, again, it depends. It varies from state to state. There isn't some uniform standard on these. And so the idea of trying to point out, like, well, hey, some of these charter schools have done really well for students. I'm sure they have. Stacy Davis Gates has not made the claim that they can't do that or that they haven't done that or it's impossible for them to do that. She said that the school choice policies and initiatives are grounded in racism or racist motivations. And this is all just being directed towards, hey, no, actually, if you think about it, charter schools can be great. All right, Nate, cool. What does this have to do with Stacy Davis Gates and an accusation of hypocrisy? The accusation is she said private school is racist and then sent her kid to one. She didn't do the first part. She did do the second part.
Dave, those are remarkable numbers, Senator, right? We should be standing up and cheering, "Go Harlem!" because it's the center of a revolution that's happening in education, and you're at the epicenter of it. You got to be thrilled. I want to answer your question, but you bring up the financing, and let's talk about the financing here. This is full screen number 3, Chris. The cost of charter schools versus traditional schools. The cost per student of a charter school is $6,585. The cost per student in public schools, $10,771. Across America, there's about 60 cents spent per student.
And that, yeah, I don't know if that holds now. I think this was a couple years ago. Actually, no, that right there is from May of 2008. Those numbers have dramatically changed. I mean, the economy is much different now than it was when they would have compiled that stuff.
At a charter school versus a dollar per public student. In New York, it's more like 70%. So actually, you're getting better.
I don't like to think of it as Nate bashing. It's Nate content bashing. And not all of his content deserves bashing. Just this kind of stuff does, where he just decides to follow follow the lemmings on a conservative media narrative. But I guess the answer to your question is yes. Yes, I'm doing this without you. So, but it's nice to have you here. Welcome to the live chat. Yeah.
Results in charter schools for less money. That is accurate.
That is not accurate. Number one,
you just keep denying that facts from studies from Stanford are not.
I don't like it when Scarborough gets giddy about fact, like he's really excited about like this kind of policy wonk thing, and I don't know if you ask Scarborough about charter schools, if he would be this enthusiastic about them, given how some of them have performed in some areas. But the guy that he's actually talking to right there is I think a state rep from New York who is he doesn't really like the school choice movements too, like Stacy Davis Gates. And again, they're kind of doing this thing where they're like, well, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with funneling this money off and sending it over there? Well, there's a lot of problems with it. If you make a commitment to have any kind of public education, and your idea of dealing with problems in that is to further defund them and shunt that money over to private institutions that, depending on the legislation you put in place, may or may not be held to the same level of accountability. And then if they can turn some numbers around, you're like, look, it's working. It's the marketplace, baby. How you get that excited about the marketplace kicking ass in the realm of education and providing competition when they're being directly subsidized by government funds is a little weird. But anyway, that's still, this being said, this clip really doesn't have anything to do with Stacy Davis Gates' take on school choice. This is just Nate trying to say, well, hey, here's Joe Scarborough talking to another person about how great charter schools are, and charter schools do benefit from school choice policies. Okay. But Nate hasn't dealt with the fact that his previous video clip did not actually address his central claim. She said that private schools are racist. She didn't.
Accurate. How do you say that? How can you say that? Is Stanford lying?
I think that those statistics, there are statistics that show the opposite. But let me just point out something. First of all, charter schools were always intended to do better for less.
Now, that was 10 years ago. And here is how the NYC.
Okay, he's saying like that was around 10 years ago. And that's true. I think that was around, around about that time. Wilberforce writes, when socioeconomic status is controlled for public school students have by far the highest test scores among public, charter, and private schools. This is true. Also, one of the things I'm probably going to get into more in the part 2 of this when I get to it, because he has another video based on Stacy Davis Gates, and he's reacting to her appearance on CNN. She gets interviewed on CNN. And then he goes into more of this kind of school choice stuff. But I can bring up a little preview of that. George W. Bush, who was a big proponent for charter schools and voucher programs, wanted to do a federal push. He wanted to make a federal initiative about this, and he assembled a pretty decent team. I can't remember the 2 people that he put together, but their job was to kind of take a look at the programs and see how would we do this, and how do we kind of what are the receipts on this? How do we justify this as a sell to the public? And what they ended up coming back with was very similar to what Wilberforce had mentioned, that in most cases it was largely a push, that in terms of test scores, a lot of public schools performed better than they thought. And most of them performed better in terms of getting kids prepared for college at a much lower rate of public expenditure than charter or voucher schools or private schools. And so in terms of kind of looking at these things, trying to measure apples to apples as much as they could, they basically came up with what was essentially a wash, and there was really no way to push it. And I can't remember what they called that group, but it was a little presidential committee on that, and it came back with kind of you know what, actually public schools are a little bit better at this, and what you're trying to fix issues about public schools that aren't really there. One of the conclusions that they made is that if you really want to improve outcomes, you make sure that full federal funding goes directly to the public schools themselves, so that they have the resources to pay their teachers and to equip their classrooms and get their kids the best resources. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But it was a little bit, and then I think after that, actually, with George W. Bush, I think it kind of fizzled. I don't think that was as much of a push after that. So, but thank you, Wilberforce, for sharing that, because that is a good point.
Charter schools are stacking up to public schools today.
Yes, well, this dreary weather can't possibly put a damper on the bright students shining inside of Success Academy Bronx 2, one of its nearly 50 schools.
I don't know.
They passed their state exams with flying colors. School officials tell us 11,000.
Awesome. Cool. You got an example of a school in New York doing really well. Their students passing tests. If that's the only metric that we need to determine that kids are doing okay, all right, that's not the only factor that you'd want to put in there. This one is a New York school, and I again, there's this kind of weird thing. I kind of sense if Nate's seeing a video where the Chicago Teachers Union is opposed to school choice programs and voucher programs and these kinds of things, he's getting defensive about it. I'm just wondering, is it maybe he's got his kids enrolled in one of these kinds of schools in New York City? If he does, there's a very good chance that his kids are going to some pretty decent schools. But school choice programs are different than private schools, and even the kind of private subsidized schools that exist out there can vary widely in what they offer kids and what the outcomes are for those kids. The fact that you may have a decent collection of these kinds of schools in the greater New York City area would not be indicative of it, that you can't just then make the connection. Well, these schools work great in New York, they must work great in Chicago. Okay, that could be possible, but the problem is that because of local legislature and state legislature differences, a lot of these schools aren't going to be set up the same way, and they're not going to be run the same way. They're not going to be administered the same way. That's sort of the whole point. They can kind of do things completely differently, and that can vary from city to city, state to state. So again, this kind of thing, putting this out there, like, well, here's an example of one of these charter schools, voucher schools, whatever, doing great. Okay, she didn't say they couldn't.
Of Success Academy students in grades 3 through 8 took state exams. 76.4% passed the ELA test, and a whopping 82.7% were proficient in math. These rates are double and triple those of students in New York City district schools, where just 49% of all students passed ELA and only 37.9% passed math. The majority of students at Success Academy are children of color from low-income neighborhoods admitted through a random public lottery. We spoke with their principal and fourth graders proud of this achievement.
I'm deeply excited for my community. I was born and raised here in the South Bronx and in this community. So for our kids to really still show up, through our deep belief in them, it was really exciting to see.
I felt very excited, and my parents felt very proud of me.
Now, Success Academy tells me 100% of their graduates have been accepted to college, many of them to highly selective schools. School officials also tell me that many of these kids are the first in their families to have a shot at higher education.
And so I guess we can take from this that because this school is successful, all charter schools are successful. None of them could possibly be considered racist. And therefore, any kinds of programs designed to shunt public money away from public schools towards these kinds of private hybrid academy type things, therefore also structurally can't be accused of being racist, right? I mean, is that logical? No, of course that's not logical. None of that follows. And again, what does this have to do with the accusation? She's a hypocrite because she said private schools were racist. She didn't. None of this is dealing with the central issue, which was ginned up by the conservative media. They might have a case to make. I'll put this out there. They would have a case to make if the school that she's enrolling her kid in was one of these private schools, was a charter school, or a voucher school program. As far as I know, as I've dug into this story, the Catholic school that she enrolled her son in has 5 kids that are on the Invest in Kids program, which is an Illinois program that is kind of controversial. It's on the chopping block. It's set to expire. There's a vote coming up for it for people in Chicago, I think in November. And what it essentially is it's a giant pot of money. If you have cash, you can donate a bunch of money into this education fund called Invest in Kids, and you get a 75% write-off on your investment, on your income taxes. Pretty sweet deal. So 25% of that is actually what you donated is actually going directly to a deserving student, because what it creates is a fund, and students can apply for a scholarship paid for by that fund. My understanding is that the Catholic school that she enrolled her son in has 5 students that received that Invest in Kids scholarship because they applied for it before. And those scholarships are set to expire this year because the push from the teachers union and from other groups is to get rid of that, because it seems like kind of a money. It's kind of an interesting idea, because it's like, okay, well, if I donate money into a big kitty over here, into this big pot of money, and I get 75% back off on my taxes, that means I donate a huge chunk of money, but only 25% of it I only really sacrifice 25% of that. I get to save that on my taxes. The government is then pitching in that 75% in a way on the back end. So it is a way of kind of still shifting public money towards these kinds of private initiatives. And from what I understand, Invest in Kids, that scholarship program, if you want to apply for that, you don't get that. You only get that if you're attending one of the schools that are trying to participate in those kinds of programs. A private school looking to get subsidized by some public funding mechanism. So.
In the Morrisania section of the Bronx, Anthony Carlo.
Now, charter schools and private schools are outperforming public schools by double and triple digits. It's not even close. And almost all those students in those charter and private schools are from poor families in those poorest of neighborhoods. But the teachers union is calling them racist? So obviously the teachers union president wouldn't send her.
The teachers union didn't call those private schools racist. Even Stacy Davis Gates didn't call those schools racist. Her position is that public school choice policies, vouchers, those kinds of things, those are racist.
Kid to a racist school that outperforms the public schools.
There isn't a racist school here, Nate.
Of course not.
President of the Chicago Teachers Union is defending her and her husband's choice to send their son to a private school, despite the criticism it's created.
Davis Gates said, "It was a difficult decision for us because there is not a lot to offer Black youth who are entering high school. In many of our schools on the South Side and West Side, the course offerings are very marginal and limited. For my husband and me, it forced us to send our son after years of attending a public school to a private high school so he could live out his dream of being a soccer player while also having a curriculum that can meet his social and emotional needs, even as his two sisters remain in Chicago public schools. We will continue to oppose siphoning public school resources off to private instructions through voucher programs, and we will continue to fight against destructive and racist school closings that have left a trail of devastation in Black and brown communities."
So she's able to send her kids to private schools, but wants to keep other poor Black residents in Chicago. She wants to keep their kids in the failing schools. And then
no, she doesn't. I don't even know how. This is classic. He's just like kind of trying to lambaste on oh, okay. So what she's trying to do is she's got that hot shot CTU president cash, so she can afford to send her son, over to this la-di-da Catholic school. I think the Catholic school that she's sending her kid to, I think it is a cost of around $15,000 or $16,000 per year, and that's expensive. However, I live in a relatively low cost of living part of the state of Michigan, and there is a pretty popular Catholic high school in this area that I believe also costs $16,000 or $17,000 to go to. And considered amongst other private school options in the area, that's considered affordable. And it's that price. And she's paying the same or less in Chicago. I live in the center of Michigan, and it's the same price or more than a private Catholic school with a decent soccer team, apparently. So put that in context. It's expensive, yes. She's a middle-class professional, upper middle-class professional. They make good money. I don't know what her husband does. She decides to do this because if you actually look into other options that she was looking at, she goes into them. She was considering sending her kid out of the city to live with her brother or her husband's brother in another town because he lived in a town with a better school. And so rather than him commute 2 or 3 hours each way to a completely different side of the city, have to be on buses all the time and that kind of stuff, maybe it'd be better if he just left the city and went and did that. She didn't want to do that, but that was an option. So that gives you an idea kind of where schools have gone with this. So she has the ability to do this. Nate seems to be saying oh, okay, well, she's fine doing this for her, but she's obviously against school choice for other people. No, she's not. The idea that you can choose to put your kids in another school is not something that she said she's against. It's not something that I think most advocates for public school would say that they're against either. If you're a parent and you want to send your kids to a private school or religious school, whatever, you should be free to do that. However, there's going to be pluses and minuses to that. What most of the public school advocates are against is taking public money and siphoning that away from the public education and towards these kinds of private or religious schools because, for whatever reason. And I think in their case, they believe it creates an accelerating factor of moving everybody away from the public schools when they're already facing funding problems. That's their central criticism. Now Nate's going on with this, well, she's got hers and she wants to pull the ladder up from everybody else. I don't see how he's getting that from her saying that she thinks that school choice policy and initiatives are rooted in racism. I just don't.
And if someone says that's wrong, she yells racism. That's essentially all she's doing. Now,
No, she's not.
Challenge you to find a worse hypocrite than this Democratic leader for the teachers union. She knows those schools aren't good. She knows those schools aren't teaching her son. She knows that. But she wants to keep her $100,000 six-figure job, $100,000, $200,000 a year job, and tell you who are Black and need the choice or need the ability to send your kids to good schools, she needs you not to do that. Because if you were to take your kid out of that failing school and put your child in a school that would teach them, that was one of the best schools in the state, that would take money out of her mouth.
There's another part of the narrative that I haven't touched on yet, and that is that all the public schools in Chicago are bad. That's the impression that you're probably getting from Nate here. Some of the criticism that has been leveled against Stacy Davis Gates on social media was from people that were trying to say, like, well, wait a minute, her reason for saying that she wants to send her son to this Catholic school was that he doesn't have access to a good soccer team, and he really wants to be able to play soccer on a good team. Okay. Somebody found one and said there's actually a pretty good public school in Chicago with a decent boys soccer team. Why doesn't he just go there? Now, I don't know why she didn't send him there, and I can't get into the details of that because I mean, it requires a level of nuance and probably some local, shoe leather to figure out if what he's saying is true about this particular public school. But it seemed to be that the basic case was, and she's not making the argument that all public schools in Chicago are failing. Nate seems to be painting all public schools in Chicago as failing, that with a very broad brush. What she's trying to say is that for her and her family, their options where they live in the South Side are not great. They don't have local public options that are good for her kids, and anything that she wants to send them to is going to be far flung. And maybe the Catholic one meets some kind of balance of needs that she and her husband believe their son needs. That's their decision. The idea that this looks bad for a CTU president to enroll one of her kids in a private school, I mean, maybe those optics probably aren't the best. I'm sure if she could enroll her kids in really high performing public schools that were nearby, she could do that. Here's the thing, though. She lives in in a predominantly black neighborhood in the South Side of Chicago. If she packed up and left and moved to a kind of gentrified neighborhood that had some really good, well-funded, thanks to those bougie tax rates there, property tax rates, and did that solely so that she could enroll her kids in those schools there, would Nate take it easy on her? I mean, would he, if she just packed up and left? One of the reasons that she stated that she wants to live in that neighborhood is because she likes being in that community. She likes being around people affected by these issues. She sees it every day. She knows her kids are kind of affected at it. She said in other statements, less so when they're under the 8th grade. It's when you get to high school, parts of middle school and high school, where the lack of extracurricular activity and the lack of optional opportunities really kicks in. They can kind of give your kid the basics, but the kid's not going to be able to build out anything that's going to help them get into college. That seemed to be the issue for what they were facing with their son, and they're going to be looking at that with their daughters. And every family there, according to her, kind of has to weigh those same things when it comes to their kids' education. So, yeah. Is she being hypocritical? No. It's unfortunate that the optics work out this way, but here's the thing that I know about conservatives. If she tried to do this where she managed the optics in another way, she kept her son in the failing school, what would Nate say? This monster is keeping her son in an intentionally failing school, one of the worst performing schools, to burnish her credentials as a teachers union representative. What monster would do that? Then I would say, yeah, that's probably a good claim to be made. That would be kind of cynical if she was doing that to her son. But she's not. She's trying to find an education that works for her son. And it just so happens where they're at, this seems to be the best fit, and she and her husband can afford it. And she doesn't think that school's racist and hasn't called them racist.
So she doesn't care about your kid. She cares about the money for the teachers union. So
she cares about both, generally, I would say. I don't know how he's arriving at the conclusion that she cares about money but doesn't care about kids. Most of us care about money. We have to. We live in a capitalist society. That's just a no-brainer. If you're going to make the claim that they don't care, that you don't care about kids in general, or specifically kids in Chicago as a president of a teachers union, prove it. Nate, you need to prove that. You need to show why that is the case. And so far, I've just heard the only thing that he's got for proof is that she said private schools were racist when she didn't. So this isn't great.
I'm going to ask you, are charter schools racist? I believe this.
I think some of the initiatives that have gone into building charter schools out are racist. Yes. Are charter schools themselves or individual ones racist in the sense that they're run by members of the like? I really don't know what he's trying to what he's trying to invoke here. Is it like, oh, well, they're run by members of the KKK that are indoctrinating your kid with white supremacy ideology? No, I don't think that they're trying to do that. No. Is there a structural racism component to charter schools, the policies that organize them and fund them? Definitely. That's a structural criticism. We don't have to say, and because it's structurally the case that they're racist, it means everybody that's participating in that is individually racist. Haha, check and mate, liberals. That doesn't follow, because you don't understand the difference between a structural critique and a personal critique or a personal attack. You're just trying to conflate them all together. This is more evident in part. Will be more evident in part 2. But let's see how he wraps this up.
This woman doesn't give a damn about kids, doesn't give a damn about any of this stuff. I believe only she gives a damn about is the bottom line for the teachers union. And if that means destroy...
Well, that last part, she does need to care about that. She's the president of the teachers union. So that's important that she cares about. Nate hasn't done anything to demonstrate the first 2 accusations that he's made.
Destroying the lives of black children in Chicago, that's what she's going to do. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section, people, because I think...
Okay, so it must be the case that in order... The bottom line of Chicago Teachers Union is automatically... is at odds with the benefits of the kids. Show that then. Show how it is the case that the initiatives put in place or put in motion by the Chicago Teachers Union would automatically entail detrimental effects to public school children. Nate, he's about receipts. He's about that proof. He hasn't shown that. So show that. That's a big claim. And it's very easy for conservatives. And this is one of these things where, if he's trying to say that he's the independent on this issue, this is not. These are classic right-wing, anti-public school talking points.
She's the ultimate racist because she's the one who's really doing harm to black and brown children. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section.
Well, I told you where you're wrong here. She is not. I don't see how you've demonstrated that she's done harm to black and brown families when she's working to try to get those underfunded schools funded. This is the thing that I find fascinating about this. Like, oh, hey, we need these kinds of programs because they allow parents to get their kids out of these failing schools. Why are those schools failing? Well, they're underfunded. So you're going to enroll in a program that gets you federal funding to send your kid to a charter school or some kind of voucher thing, right? And then you're going to probably end up paying extra money out of your pocket in tuition, because a lot of times they don't talk about this. You might get some of that funding redirected your way when you apply for it, but it goes towards the tuition bill that you're going to owe. So now you're paying maybe $1,000 to $4,000 a year, and then the bulk of it is being paid for by the voucher that's shifting public funding for your kid, that per pupil cost, over to that school. And then you get to deal with the fact that if your kid gets disciplined by that school, good luck appealing that. Is there a school board you can take your issues to? Absolutely not. They don't need no stinking school boards. Is there a teachers union that's fighting for the teachers to make sure that they have good hours, good benefits, good pay, good training, and solid licensure? No. But hey, I heard that these kids at Success Academy, it was a charter school in Manhattan or Brooklyn or wherever it was, South Brooklyn, 100% of them passed their tests. I'll pay extra to send my kid there, to send my kid, not to that school, but to a school that's categorically like that, because it somehow follows that must work. No, no. This is not good thinking. This is not good criticism. This is not solid critical thinking. This is not good media analysis. This is Nate surrendering to a media narrative laid out by other people that put this out there. The New York Post, some local affiliates, and it wasn't just the New York Post, but somebody else did essentially the same thing. They essentially came up with the narrative for this. She said private schools were racist. She put her kid in a school, therefore she's a hypocrite. Okay. If she'd said that private schools were racist and then enrolled her kid in one of those private schools, I would agree. That would make her something of a hypocrite. But she didn't say that. They can't show that she said that. What they demonstrated is that she said something much more nuanced, that she doesn't like school choice policy. And that isn't the same thing. So shut out of luck there. So strike one on that one. Part two we're going to get into is going to be, like I said earlier, she made an appearance on CNN in an interview, and Nate did an analysis of that. That is longer. It's twice as long as this one, so I will catch that one. We'll get to that one when there is more time. But anyway, thanks everybody in the live chat. Sorry I didn't get to highlight as many as I would like. But I got to wrap this one up kind of quick because I'm just doing this one on my lunch break. But I will catch you next time for the next one. Like I'm hoping to follow up this one fairly quickly, but my next video may not be this one. It may be a little out of sync. But thank you again. As always, thanks for the contributions in the live chat. Comment, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. You can reach out to me, jeffersonspatchcock@gmail.com. I will see you all later.